What's up, everybody, and welcome to Scouting the Fins. We will be reviewing the Miami Dolphins draft day haul here for day 3. They are currently signing a whole bunch of UDFA players. They did select 5 to 6 players from rounds 4 to 7 here. But before we get into that, I want to talk about one of our sponsors for the show today, Thompson Cigar. Order $75 or more worth of cigars on ThompsonCigar.com and use the promo code 3yards20 to get 20% off of your order. Once again, use promo code 3yards20 for 20% off of your order of $75 or more. My co-hosts, Coach and Eric, gentlemen, the draft has concluded. Miami is now signing UDFAs. Day 3 haul. What was your guys' initial impression and analysis?
Yeah, I think it's a continuation of kind of what we saw in the first 2 rounds of the draft. You know, the Dolphins have very clearly come into this draft with the idea that they want to get bigger, they want to get more physical, and they've done pretty much exactly that. Between adding a guy like Jordan Phillips, who at 20 years old, I think has a lot of untapped potential, could be a really solid rotational defensive lineman. And then adding a guy like Zeke Biggers at 6'5", 320 plus pounds, listed much heavier than that when he actually was playing. So we'll see where he ends up playing at. But for a guy to be, to have a 1.74 10-yard split in the 40 at his size is really impressive. Quinn Ewers is going to be an interesting discussion to have. I'm sure we will touch on that quite a bit. I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. I kind of find myself doing like that, the meme reaction where you take a sip and you're like, no, well maybe no. That's kind of my reaction to the Quinn Ewers thing. But aside from that, I don't know how I felt about Jason Marshall. He's an exceptional athlete at corner. Dante Trader, I think he's a player that he's a good football player. And with safeties, I tend to not worry about the athletic testing as much because those are players that tend to do well despite average athletic testing. And I'm sure we'll touch on it a little bit, but I'm actually really excited about what they're doing with some of these undrafted free agent players that we're seeing coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that day 3 of the draft, a big part of that is filling in the holes of your roster. We came into the draft talking about running backs that we had to add a running back, and you add a Ollie Gordon as your 4th running back in that room. We talked about the interior defensive line basically being bare outside of Sealer and Benito Jones, and you come out of that with 3 guys to really fill out that room. Defensive backs needed to add guys there, did that with Marshall and Trader. Got some guys that are high floor type players that you can expect maybe not to start this year, but there's guys that we got here on day 3 that you should reasonably expect to contribute in 2025, as well as some other guys that, have a very high ceiling. I mean, a Jason Marshall is a type of guy that, you don't know exactly what you're going to get, but if you get the best version of him, is going to end up being a steal. And you could say the same thing, about Quinn Ewers. I mean, if he even develops into a solid backup as a 7th round pick, that's a very good value for that. So I think that after getting 2 really good players, regardless of how you talk about them, in Kenneth Grant and Jonah Savaiineaea, I think they did a good job with these 6 picks in day 3 of continuing to fill some holes while, also adding some guys that could surprise us in the future.
I kind of felt like this draft was a little bit underwhelming, just maybe because of the hype surrounding it, specifically for the Miami Dolphins. I thought that they could have gotten maybe a little bit more impactful players had they not traded out of the 4th round as well. That maybe they could have found somebody as well, maybe another corner better, maybe another offensive lineman like a Jalen Rivers, but he went over to the Bengals. He's much more suited towards a gap scheme. Well, we talked about Miles Frazier as potentially being a backup to James Daniels and Jonah Savaiineaea in case Austin Jackson would go down. Would have a succession plan in there, but that's why they have Liam Eichenberg. People, that's why Liam Eichenberg came back to the Miami Dolphins. Outside of this, I mean, Eric, you hit the nail on the head. They have gotten younger. They have gotten faster. They have gotten cheaper. They have gotten stronger. Almost 2,900 pounds added to the Miami Dolphins trenches these last 3 days. Like that is a lot. That's some big boys on the offensive and defensive line. Naming the defensive line now, Zach Sealer doesn't have an empty house to come to, kind of like that Will Smith meme in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He's like, he's got
He's going to be the little guy in the room now.
Yeah, he's the little guy in the room now, man. He's got Zeke Biggers, he's got Jordan Phillips, he's got Kenneth Grant. Jordan Phillips talked a little bit about Kenneth Grant. You say he's like my brother now. He had a very, very high praise for him. He stated, and I quote, very talented, very athletic for a big guy. I got a chance to see him a little bit during the Shrine Bowl. I got a chance to be around him. He's definitely athletic and just physical at the point of attack. His game definitely does stand out to me, and I think us together will do some special things together. Chris Greer called him, a very, very good run stopper. He's got to work a little bit more on his pass rush juice. He's a student of the game. He studies every single D tackle. He watched a lot of Jordan Phillips, his namesake twin, who used to play for the Dolphins, Cardinals, and now the Buffalo Bills. The next prospect was Jason Marshall Jr. I had a scout text me about it. He's like, I'm confused about this pick. He's quote unquote so bad. I'm going to withhold my judgment of Jason Marshall Jr. because I got to talk to him a little bit. Seems very excited, hometown kid as well. Primarily plays outside corner. Had just a tad bit of injuries, nothing too big. But I found it a little bit funny that he tries to model his game after Jalen Ramsey, and Jalen Ramsey is pretty much on his way out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the big injury for him was a torn labrum back in October that ended his season. He does have, 39 starts, and I can see the brashness of Jalen Ramsey in Jason Marshall's game. From what I read, sounds like he had some, in similar size. Sounds like he may have had some confidence issues that may have contributed to the fall off in play. But like I said during the summary, like that's the type of player that if you do get him back on track, hopefully ease him in. I mean, our cornerback room isn't the greatest place to ease a young guy in, but if you can do that, then that could be a really good player.
Yeah, the theme for Jason Marshall Jr. and for a lot of these other players, namely Quinn Evers, is Mike McDaniel's famous quote, adversity is opportunity. So I asked Jason Marshall Jr., head coach Mike McDaniel always says that adversity is opportunity. And, at the end of the last season, he had a torn labrum. He suffered a season injury, but he impressed at the NFL Combine. He had a great 40 time, 4.49, 37.5-inch vertical, 10-foot broad jump. And I asked him if he got any feedback from the Dolphins at the Combine. He said he was just talking to scouts and stuff like that, but nothing feedback related. However, the turning point came for Jason Marshall Jr. and specifically the Dolphins organization when he went to the local pro day around 3 weeks ago, and he had conversations with Anthony Weaver, Mike McDaniel. He said that the on-field work that he did with the Dolphins is what turned it around. That's what made the coaching staff and Chris Greer notice. He said, I felt like I went out there and I was the best performer. I was able to set up myself apart from everybody else. Coach McDaniel, was talking to the scouts, was talking to Greer, was talking to him. They were all having conversations, and I think that's ultimately where Jason Marshall Jr. thinks, and I think so too. I mean, there were a lot of corners on the board, namely Dorian Strong, for one. There was Colby Black also on the board. I sat there scratching my head. I'm like, why? Why? Eric, your thoughts?
Yeah. If we're projecting him to be his absolute best self, then I absolutely understand why the Dolphins would make the pick. And I think that there's enough from an athleticism standpoint to say, yes, all the tools are there for this guy to be a good man press cover corner. But then you watch him play, and I almost come away thinking, and maybe we can discuss this later on in the show when we touch on some of the undrafted guys. I come away with thinking that he's the second best cornerback that the Dolphins added today overall.
Wow.
A little bit of a hot take there.
We need to get into it, Eric. That's a very bold take. We need to get into that. Let's not leave this for the later part of the show.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I just think that when number one, I don't think the athleticism with BJ Adams is as bad as some people have made it out to be. And I just think on film you see it better with Adams. He's a really good press corner, really good at knocking guys off the top of their routes. He sticks in coverage. He's arguably between him and Armstrong, my favorite undrafted free agent acquisition to this point. I think BJ Adams has a chance to kind of be the storm duck of this undrafted free agency period for the Miami Dolphins.
Coach, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, going to have to defer to you guys on that because BJ Adams is not a player that I'm familiar with.
Well, BJ Adams played right behind my house at UCF, and I felt like Mac McWilliams was the better corner, and albeit he was drafted higher, he was actually drafted compared to BJ Adams. 1.6 in the 10-yard dash, 9'9" broad jump. Didn't really do the 3-cone drill. When we talk about his cloud coverage, specifically in Anthony Weaver's scheme, that is going to help because he's able to find those soft spots in the zone. Eric, you did say that he can jam receivers in press coverage. We know that the Dolphins are going to be playing a little bit more press coverage. He has a high FBI. He shows it off in passing off routes. And I think that's where the Dolphins secondary last year really lacked in passing off routes on some motions, on some screens. They weren't necessarily playing bump and run so much. It was more so trying to follow the man and who has what. I mean, we saw Jordan Poyer, Javon Holland, Jalen Ramsey, sometimes even Kendall Fuller, who had issues trying to figure out who they're going to take and who to pass off. All of those guys, with the exception of Jalen Ramsey, who most likely won't be part of the Dolphins anymore, won't be on the team in 2025. So I think that's something to take note of.
Yeah, and I also think that it's, as you mentioned, okay. For a second, I wasn't sure if you had crashed or if you were just holding your pose for dramatic effect. No, I think it also needs to be said that if they're going to be playing a little bit more press man, there's going to be a little bit less of that kind of passing off routes and making sure, okay, I need to stay in my zone and kind of keeping that integrity in the system, kind of making it a little bit more meat and potatoes. And I think, especially as you're considering that this is going to be a younger secondary than it was last year, that might be helpful for some of these guys to kind of simplify the game just a little bit, and maybe, later on in the season start to kind of add additional layers to it as you go along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the meat and potatoes of this draft was good run defense, great tackling, and that's not BJ Adams right there. He's not a fantastic tackler. He has some lapses, and that doesn't necessarily, find the ball defending the run. For outside corners, I mean, you're not really defending the run that well unless you're playing a lot of zone. I don't expect the Dolphins to play a lot of zone, considering that there's going to be a change of this secondary. There's going to be a bit of a tweak in this scheme, considering of what we know. So that's going to be interesting to take note of. All right, we'll get into Ollie Gordon the second. I feel like this was my favorite pick of the day so far, specifically for day 3. I loved him in 2023. Had a bit of a down year in 2024. Coach, when you watch Ollie Gordon, bruiser definitely, but what sticks out about his game to you that will help him to get on the field?
He's definitely a different type of back than any of the other guys that we have. Like when you look at him, he almost looks more like a tight end than he does a running back, just with how tall and well built he is. But he's obviously a running back. Had a 1,700-yard season in 2023 before, and 21 touchdowns before. Cutting that almost in half. We talked about guys being younger, someone that just turned 21 before the draft, and one thing that really can get him on the field early is how aggressive he is in pass pro. And, he's talked about that, about how he's looking to punish those blitzers. And if they decide to blitz again, then, he's going to, again, step it up a notch, try to make sure that they don't want to blitz the next time. Reliable as a receiver, didn't have a single drop on 38 targets in 2024. I don't feel like he runs as big as he is in short yardage situations. But he, once he gets going, like an arm tackle is not going to bring this guy down. Not near the quickness and the change of direction in short areas that you have with a Devon Achane or even a Jalen Wright. But, we talk about how these running backs, they want them to run this outside zone. Like they want them to stay on track, and they're not asking for a big cut. It's 3 steps towards that tight end position, and then from there just a slight movement of the path based on how the blocks are developing. So I don't know that 0 to 40 speed is critical. Obviously helps, but if you can get a big guy that can run through some arm tackles on the way through the line of scrimmage, and then he gets to that second level, and he can run away from guys with those long strides once he gets into the open field.
That's a great breakdown of Ollie Gordon. He did mention in the presser that the reason why he had production issues was not necessarily because of him, but there was like a down point in the season for Oklahoma State. But he said he wasn't focused on producing. He wasn't focused on getting too many carries. He was focused on making sure the team was okay, making sure, everyone was able to eat, everyone was able to produce. Sounds like a very unselfish guy. The Dolphins need more of those guys. And I think this was the theme. And I think this is what the culture is shifting towards compared to guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Ramsey. Eric and Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer's press conference, they talked about finding hard-nosed guys, people getting on one page, trying to change the culture of bullies. Ollie Gordon has that, but do you believe with the rest of the draft class, with who the Dolphins currently have, can they make that push into December and January in those cold games and tough it out in the trenches?
So it's a really tough ask, because you're asking them to kind of make that 180 really over the course of one off season, and I think that's probably not fair from where they were. But I think when you add players like Grant and you add players like Phillips to the defensive line, to where you take that game in Green Bay last season on Thanksgiving night, and you're just getting absolutely carved up by Josh Jacobs carry after carry, having a Kenneth Grant in the middle, having a Jordan Phillips to spell Kenneth Grant in the middle, and then having Benito Jones to spell him in the middle. I think that's where the Dolphins are going to kind of be at their best on defenses, kind of with the freshness that the depth is going to allow them to have in the run game. And then you think about, on the flip side of that, I think Ollie Gordon can come in and kind of be the closer offensively right away. And then you combine that with a Jonah Savaiineaea and a James Daniels, and we all know the work that Aaron Brewer can kind of do in the run game, and Austin Jackson can even do in the run game. This is an offensive line that, especially in a Mike McDaniel system, and this is going to be really pivotal for a guy like Gordon, because as you mentioned, doesn't have the quickest acceleration. I think there's going to be a decent amount of yards before contact generated in this offense. And with Gordon, yards before contact equals yards after contact, because once he gets to that top speed, as you mentioned, he is a guy that's going to be really difficult to take down. So I do think that they're better equipped to play in those games now and take that challenge on. Just from a personnel standpoint, but there's going to have to be, I think offensively, Mike McDaniel's going to have to make kind of that commitment as well to embracing that. I know we've seen him kind of try it a little bit, but I do think adding Savaiineaea, adding Gordon, they're good signs, but you need to see that commitment actually borne out on the field as well.
Yeah, that was a good analysis of that. All right, we're going to go ahead and head to break. After break, we will talk about the rest of the Dolphins draft class, some of the UDFA signings they have made so far. Do you ever watch sports and find yourself wishing there was a way to get into the game? With Underdog, there's finally a way to make picks on sports without leaving the house. The game is in your hands. They've got all your favorite leagues, teams, and stars to choose from. Create entries with any basketball, baseball picks, and you can mix and match across other sports. To play, choose whether a play will go higher or lower on one of their stats, such as strikeouts, home runs, rebounds, points, and assists. You can play with as little as $1, and if you get everything right, you can win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn $1 into $1,000 just with your sports knowledge. Download the Underdog app and sign up now using promo code 3yards to unlock a special offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Join in on the fun when you sign up with promo code 3yards. Claim your special offer today and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly upon first deposit.
18 plus, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 19 plus in Alabama, New England, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT-STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE NY or text Hope NY to 467369. Must be 18 plus.
All right, and we are back. Speaking of going higher or lower, I wonder who actually got higher on Davion Mitchell's points when the Heat played the Cavaliers. Even though he had that many points, the Heat still lost by 37. You can check out more from on the Heat with our 5 on the floor guys over on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. All right, gentlemen, the next pick was defensive back. It was a defensive back from Maryland. I will say that. Dante Trader Jr. They had, because there were two Maryland draft picks that they had, and I was blanking on it. But Dante Trader Jr. He can play all over the field. He can play the star position. I was reading a scouting analysis of it, and one Ravens guy called him Kyle Hamilton light. And I kind of disagree with that because even though he can play all over the field, that impact was not the same as you saw from Kyle Hamilton at Notre Dame. Big Ten prospects were the name of the game for the Miami Dolphins for this draft and even last draft as well. So I was kind of surprised they double dipped at Maryland. But yeah, he played lacrosse in 2023 alongside playing football. I asked him, what was the decision into going into football full time, and he pretty much said that I had a better shot to go to the league and also to take care of his body. He was playing, two sports for 18 months straight. And it can be really hard on the body and mind, coach. I'm sure you have players along the line who are also wrestlers, along with,
Yep.
Playing on the offensive line, playing two sports is hard for sure. But he did mention that, it helped to sharpen his mental acumen when and also that since playing DB is a hard sport, he could get beat on one play and it can be a 60 70 yard touchdown. He needs to be able to build that mental fortitude, and lacrosse helped with that. I do know in lacrosse you have to be very, very fluid, especially on your hips. You have to be quick on your feet. Trader Jr. did say that that helped him out a lot alongside the mental aspect of the game. Eric, they did get a defensive back. They did get a safety, but I don't think we ever touched up on Dante Trader Jr.
No, and really my day 3 guy at safety was always going to be Billy Bowman. So it kind of hurt me when I saw him get drafted. But looking at Dante Trader, I think the first thing that stands out is, as a guy that's 5'10", 195, is this is the guy that's got really good football character in terms of the physicality that he plays with. I know the testing wasn't so great athletically, but I think, again, at safety, that's such a position where it's so instinctual and it's so read and react. It's almost like linebacker, where a guy that's 4'6" might play quicker than a guy that's 4'5" because he can read the play better than the next guy.
And that's who Trader Jr. is.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you see from a guy like Dante Trader on tape. Is it's a guy that's extremely intelligent, extremely physical. I think he's going to be a solid player in the run game right away, with potential to get better, in coverage, especially in terms of being able to break and kind of get there in time on some of those plays downfield and kind of getting to that. So overall, I like Dante Trader, the player. We hadn't talked about him too much because I just thought, this was a good safety draft and there were just other players that I had preferred. But looking at the player in a vacuum, I don't think you can come away and say, yeah, well, Dante Trader is just not going to make it. I think he's going to make the team, and I think he's going to be on the field at some point, whether that's special teams or even a handful of defensive snaps a game.
Yeah, I think what he said really stuck out with me was that Coach Anthony Weaver brought him into this. He said, just because he brought me in here, went to bat for me, talking about Anthony Weaver, he's familiar with him. He's familiar with his scheme. And the entire building brought him here. He said the main reason why Anthony Weaver brought him here was because of his mind, that he's able to play the mind games with the quarterback, show different looks, and be aggressive in ways of blitzing high, one high, and just the versatility that Anthony Weaver asks out of his safety that, Trader Jr. says that it fits the mold. Coach, on the X's and O's sides of things, and I know we haven't really watched tape of Trader Jr. as of yet. How is it that Trader Jr. is talking about Anthony Weaver trying to manipulate the look to opposing quarterbacks, and how that fits with this current defensive roster?
Yeah, I think that comes down to the idea of being able to disguise coverages, being able to, show a blitz that might not be coming and be able to roll out of that. But part of that is that, you have to have a good feeling of, when to bail out, right? You can walk up to the line and you can show a corner or a cat blitz, or you can, walk up in the A gap and show that blitz. But if at the snap of the ball, you're not either back in position or ready to get to your assignment, then you're leaving holes in the defense. And that, obviously, if you're leaving holes in the defense, then you lose all of the benefit of, disguising your scheme. So I think that's what they're, it comes down to with, trying to disguise it, trying to hide it, trying to give them a different picture. And that's something we see or hear Tua talking about, and his ability to, see a pre-snap look and then see the post-snap action right away and understand what that means, not only with where he's looking, but also on the other side of the field, right? So, if you, for example, your initial read is to the right side of the field and you see a linebacker coming off from the right side, you understand how that is going to rotate on the backside. And, as we know, the Dolphins are late snapping the ball a lot of the times, right? So you don't have a ton of time to make a bunch of late in the play clock adjustments. So from a defensive coordinator perspective, right, if you can do one thing, maybe for half the game, you're giving them a certain look, and you see the quarterback is reacting to it a certain way, and then at halftime you go in, you make an adjustment, you give them a different picture, and that's the kind of stuff that you see an ugly interception by a quarterback, but really it's a great play by the defense, just showing them something different, and the quarterback anticipating something that's not there. So I think that kind of describes what he's talking about.
Speaking of quarterback, the Miami Dolphins did not do the thing, and they did not draft Shedeur Sanders. They drafted Quinn Ewers instead out of Texas in the 7th round. I got to say that's a really good value considering he was potentially going to be a first rounder or maybe a top 20 pick in this year's draft class. The production was not necessarily there compared to 2023. Had the oblique injury, had a lot of mental pressure on him as well. During the presser, not a lot of us asked him about what had happened, but just trying to see how he is as a person, how he responded to it, how he would fit the mold of this Dolphins offense, specifically since he'll be backing up Zach Wilson and Tua Tagovailoa. You talk about a guy who was the number one recruit, had a lot of hype around him, transferred from Ohio State to play in Steve Sarkisian's system at Texas, won a couple playoff games, never lost to an unranked team. I mean, he left a legacy at Texas for sure. Now he's coming into the NFL. He's a backup. He's not the guy anymore for any team. He's going to have to learn how to play behind Tua, learn how to play behind Zach Wilson. But, Coach, the point is that the offense at Texas and the offense in Miami, Texas borrowed, and I will say copied, a lot of the concepts from Miami, but did not extend it how they do it into the NFL. How do you think that will help Quinn Ewers' progression in Miami?
Yeah, so I mean, anytime that we look at certain offensive schemes, right, you can pick things from what the Dolphins do today that go all the way back to the Mike Shanahan stuff, right? But it has evolved over time, and that's the same deal with Kyle Shanahan making it his own. They go to San Francisco. Mike McDaniel comes to Miami. He makes it his own. Sean McVay has his own version, and LaFleur has his own version up in Green Bay. And it's the same thing at Texas, but it all goes back to the same core concepts, right? It all goes back to that wide zone, a lot of the same reads. And as we've seen, there's copies of playbooks out there, the Dolphins, of the Falcons when Kyle Shanahan was out there. And this stuff is all the same. A lot of the verbiage is still the same. And if it's not the same, then it means very similar stuff, right? So when it comes down to the footwork, right? So if you're going play action off of a wide zone is going to be a little different than what it is off of a inside zone or a counter or something like that. So, if you've been doing that in college for a few years, then it's a shorter learning curve when you're, instead of learning the entire playbook and learning the new verbiage and learning the new steps and learning the new concepts, right now you're basically just, learning a few new words here or there, but everything else is just like riding a bike, right? It's kind of like, if you, or, driving a car would maybe be a better example, right? I go and I drive a a car for 6 months and then I come back and drive my truck, yeah, it's a little bit different, right? But there's enough similarities that you can, catch on pretty quickly. I think that's the same idea when you're going from a very similar system as a quarterback in college and then doing it in the NFL as well.
Yeah, Eric, Edwards said that he's excited to speak to Tua to learn from Tua. He had high praises for Tua Tagovailoa, saying that he knows the offense so well. His anticipation is so fun to watch. They both played under Sark, got to know Sark. It's going to be cool playing behind him, talking to him. The thing at Texas was that there are only so many layers you can take from the NFL to college that it was maybe 1 to 2 reads. In the NFL, it's 3 to 4 reads. When we watch Quinn Ewers play, he has a quick release, but the decision making is not necessarily there. And I think that might be the reason why, because of his decision making, and that he was picked in the 7th round.
I think that part of that to me is something that I think he's really going to benefit getting to speak with Tua about, because throughout the early portion of his career, when Tua's gotten into trouble, it's been a lot of that. It's been a lot of that quick release leading to maybe some less than ideal decisions. And then the other thing that I think you can kind of speak on here between him and Ewers is it's almost like, with Tua, he kind of has a translator into the Mike McDaniel offense because he also speaks the language of the Steve Sarkisian offense.
Yep.
And so he can kind of point out, okay, well, this concept is actually, if you really think about it, just like this. And so it's, you kind of have that Tua there who can kind of bridge that gap and make that learning curve for him a little bit easier. When you look at Ewers, I think you see a lot of the same positives that you see with Tua, particularly in regards to how well he can kind of layer some of his throws. But as you mentioned, some of the decision making can be better. But I also think that that's not that it's a flaw of the system itself. But I do think that when you play in a system, you kind of get accustomed to, because Steve Sarkisian is such a talented offensive mind and he's so good at scheming guys open as a quarterback, it's kind of easy to fall into that unconscious rhythm of, okay, here's the play. This guy's going to be open at this point, and it kind of just play on autopilot. And I think he's going to break out of that in a lot of the ways that I think Tua has had to early on playing in the Mike McDaniel system. That's kind of where I see it coming in. And I'm not too worried about it because we've seen Tua get over it.
Yeah, I think you can make the comparison that he's Tua light because in his scouting report, he has most of the same strengths as Tua, but not on the same level as Tua. So it's a little bit less. For his cons or his opportunities, they have the same exact thing, except for arm strength. Maybe Quinn Ewers has a better arm than Tua, but Ewers has, less accuracy. He fades into pressure much more than Tua, so his cons are much more highlighted. Like everyone says, oh yeah, Tua is really bad at this, but Quinn Ewers, if you compare those two, is a little bit much more worse than Tua, and you can't really say that, yeah, Quinn Ewers is going to be the next face of the franchise or he's going to take Tua Tagovailoa's starting spot. I mean, Tua knows his offense for the last 3 years. He's a starting quarterback. He was in MVP discussions for the last 2 years. Quinn Ewers was drafted in the 7th round. Like, this isn't like me saying you guys need to, eat this humble pie, but the difference is there. All right, moving on. Last pick was defensive lineman Zeke Biggers out of Georgia Tech. That's going to be a very, very interesting name to watch. He's mainly a run defense type of guy. And I asked him, there are a lot of big bodies in the NFL. You have done well with your size, batting down passes, getting 7.5 tackles for loss in the backfield against running backs. Coach, how can he improve his production and his pass rush to actually get on the field now that the Dolphins have a rotation of defensive linemen?
Well, I don't know how much he needs to do that to get on the field. When they drafted Kenneth Grant, and especially after they drafted Jordan Phillips, right? We talked about CJ West and how he was not. You could basically consider him being taken off the board because of his lack of length. And Zeke Biggers is the complete opposite of that. I mean, he's 6'5", 330. He's got 35-inch arms. And then, the 85 and an eighth wingspan was the largest of any defensive player at the combine. And he was 362 when he enrolled at Georgia Tech, but he dropped that weight and he stayed conditioned after that. Another young guy. So I think that in terms of getting on the field, I don't think it's going to be his pass rush that's going to get there. It's going to be his ability to come in on those early downs, right? And now, you can go out there and you can put Kenneth Grant and Zeke Biggers in there on first down to, stop a run, or maybe he's just a third and short specialist, stuff like that. But he also offers some versatility in terms of special teams. I think that if I remember correctly, he's got like 4 blocked kicks over his college career. So there's multiple ways that he can get onto the field, and that's the type of guy that you have those ways that he can get on the field in 2025 based on what he can do now, right? And that's how you develop into the guy that can get a snap here or there on third down, right? A guy that's his size does not just show up and say, okay, just put me in on pass downs and, let me try to get to the quarterback. That's the type of guy that, really needs to take advantage of the reps that he gets when he's put in there for run defense and, build up that trust and get those reps and then eventually develop into somebody that can earn reps in pass rush downs.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that you can say about Kenneth Grant, at least early on in what he's going to do on pass rush downs, can, in theory, apply to a guy like Zeke Biggers, because you can live in a world where he's eating up, a double team just off of his massive size, and you've got Sealer next to him. You've got Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips on the edges. Heck, you might even have Chop rushing from that stand-up Micah Parsons, running through the middle of the line behind those big bodies. And it just allows the Dolphins to kind of give you even more looks from a pass rush perspective because you're so good along the edge. You don't necessarily need another defense interior lineman outside of Sealer that is a pass rush specialist. And I think that's kind of the conclusion that they've come to, just given the way they've attacked the defensive line in this draft with Grant, with Biggers, with Phillips. These are guys that are really going to hold blocks on pass rush downs, probably more than anything, and just eat that space. So from that perspective, much like Coach said, I don't know how much he's really going to be asked to become that pass rusher rather than just eat that space and let the other guys go to work.
Yeah, that pretty much rounds out the Dolphins' drafted picks. Now the Dolphins are signing a flurry of undrafted agents. 2 names that I'm circling. The first one is wide receiver Andrew Armstrong of Arkansas. 6'5", 215 pounds, was leading SEC receptions, led the SEC in receptions, was Taylor Green's favorite target. He can block. He can take the rock home. That is a big, big boy. And I'm excited to see what he can bring. I mean, the Dolphins have not had a lot of big-bodied wide receivers in Tua Tagovailoa's era besides Devontae Parker. And I guess if you want to call Mike Gesicki as a light wide receiver. Coach, your thoughts on Andrew Armstrong and what he could potentially bring to the Dolphins?
Yeah, so we're hitting another one that I haven't watched. I haven't gotten a chance to look at him, so I'm gonna have to lean on you guys for that one again.
Yeah, I think a lot. I think you kind of make an apt comparison in Devontae Parker. This is a guy that's not going to be the greatest separator in the world, but he's got really good hands, and he can go up and make those contested catches. The other thing with, and I know that the knock on him was 78 catches, only 1 touchdown in Arkansas. Number one, I would tell people to kind of watch Arkansas's offense. Number two, I know some, you kind of had that love affair with Taylor Green for a little while going on. So you're probably even more well versed in Armstrong than even I am, but I come away pretty impressed with the player. I think he's got really good athleticism at his size. He definitely brings what you want in terms of blocking on the outside, and like I said, I think he is a guy that's immediately probably the best, jump ball receiver on the team. Maybe but that's not necessarily an endorsement on him, rather than the other options you have.
Yeah, I'm just reading off of what our 3 yards per carry guy Simon Clancy has out of his draft book based on Andrew Armstrong. He really liked him coming out of Arkansas's. Excellent hands, runs good routes in the short and intermediate game. He's able to gain quick and easy separation after that. He understands the timing and tempo of his routes, and he's looking to turn up field and pick up yards after the catch. 4.37 speed shows up on tape when he gets downfield. He's able to win consistently one-on-one matchups. He will be a bit on the older side. He'll be 25 years old. And analytically speaking, the most successful wide receivers are usually the youngest. So there's a little bit of knock on him for age. The next one is Texas Tech tight end Jalen Conyers. Simon Clancy did say that he had to have been drafted. Our own CK, Chris Kaufman, says that he's like a version of Tyler Warren. Coach, you and I talked about him a little bit. We didn't really dig deep into this tight end class. We didn't really expect the Dolphins to pick a tight end. He did a lot on the field, played a little bit of wildcat quarterback, but he was shifted out in obvious rundown situations too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a player who kind of maybe fills that Tanner Connor role. A good receiver, has a basketball background, flexed out a lot, not the greatest blocker, but also not asked to do it a lot. Has better size than a guy like Tanner Connor, 6'3.5", 260. So not a guy that I would expect to be an immediate contributor, right? But we've seen them try to develop Tanner Connor to be what they ended up getting Jonnu Smith to be last year. So Jalen Conyers, I can see as a player that they replace Tanner Connor on the roster, work him in a lot of those same roles that they do with Jonnu Smith today. And, as he earns his time on the field with his receiving ability, right, maybe he can learn to block along the way also. And, another high ceiling type player here.
Yeah, you see the athleticism with a guy like Conyers. He's been consistently a very good receiver at the collegiate level. I think, at least in comparing him to Tanner Connor, granted, he's, as you mentioned, he's not the best blocker in the world, but I think he's a good bit further along than Tanner Connor was when he came to Miami. So I think you're starting from a better base there with him. And just being, 260, he's going to have a little bit more of that functional play strength. So the interesting thing with Conyers to me is, how much it seems like, according to reports, tight end coach John Embry kind of banged the table for him and mentioned to him that he is going to have a chance to compete to play early on, which tells me you know, not that I think anybody's role is in jeopardy here, but you know, I don't know if the Dolphins are going to have as much patience when it comes to penalties this year at the tight end position. Just in terms of hearing that kind of messaging of a guy being undrafted and having that opportunity to play. But I also think it speaks to Conyers being a really good value as an undrafted free agent, as a guy that maybe should have been taken 5th, 6th round.
Yeah, some more UDFAs that they got. Alabama long snapper Nealon Hibbett. Maybe some competition for Blake Armstrong.
My number one long snapper.
Why your number one?
Had a 7th round grade on him.
Must have had a very, very high grade on him. Baylor wide receiver Monterey Baldwin, max speed 22.5 miles per hour, week 5 of the college football season. Auburn linebacker Eugene Asante. App State running back Nate Noel, Michigan offensive lineman Josh Preeb, Missouri wide receiver Theo Weiss, and much, much more. I want to go back to the original point of the draft where maybe a lot of fans, and this is me too, seeing the talent level as a bit underwhelming considering the amount of picks that the Dolphins have. Just taking a look at the trends and listening to a lot of the guys and reading their transcripts as well. This was more so about finding the right culture guys, finding football guys, finding blue-collar guys that are no nonsense, no drama, and most importantly, not having injury issues as well. I think most of the players that the Dolphins have drafted did not have any debilitating injuries in college or any other injuries that hampered them to miss, a season or more. I know we spoke about Jason Marshall Jr. Before his season-ending injury last year with the labrum. He didn't have any other concerns either. There is less talent in this draft class, but the culture, the mental fortitude, the toughness, the physicality is there, which the Dolphins have been lacking for a while. I mean, you can be as talented as you want. You can have all the talent in the world of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard, but if your heart's not into it, if you're not going to be hard-nosed for the ball, if you're not going to be there for your teammates when times are tough, and I think that's the case with a lot of these folks that were drafted late round. We talk about Quinn Ewers being benched for Archie Manning, Dante Trader Jr., the mental fortitude for lacrosse, not really winning anything in the Big Ten or with Maryland and some of these UDFAs as well, just straight up dogs. Kenneth Grant comes from, a winning pedigree, but if he said it himself, if we all eat, then I eat. That's all it is. It's about working together as a team, and Mike McDaniel said it, and I think this is going to be the big theme. The Miami Dolphins moving as one specific unit. Coach, Eric, and thank you guys so much for listening to us. Stick with us here on Scouting the Fins. We will have more film breakdowns, reactions, and analysis for each pick coming up in the coming weeks. So stick with us here on the 3 Yards Per Carry feed and also on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. As always, y'all, go Fins.